Imagine being married to the most desirable man in England, yet remaining a virgin for 7 agonizing years. Duchess Isobel walked down the aisle with dreams of love, but on her wedding night, the Duke of Blackwood locked his door and never looked back. Society called her the Ice Duchess. He called her nothing at all. But secrets don't stay buried forever. What happens when the Duke discovers that the reason he hated his wife was a lie invented by his own family? And what happens when he decides, after 2,555 lonely nights, that he is finally ready to claim what is his? This is the story of Alistair and Isobel. The silence in Blackwood Manor was not peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, and deliberate. It was the sound of a breath held for 7 years. Isobel sat before her vanity, the silver-backed brush moving rhythmically through her hair. 1, 2, 3. As she counted the strokes to keep from screaming. The grandfather clock in the hall struck midnight. October 14th. Their 7th anniversary. To the outside world, Isobel and Alistair, the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood, were the golden couple of the Victorian aristocracy. They possessed wealth that could rival the crown, lands that stretched across 3 counties, and a lineage that dated back to the Crusades. But within these cold stone walls, they were ghosts haunting the same hallways. Isobel set the brush down. She looked at her reflection. At 25, she was no longer the trembling, hopeful girl of 18 who had walked down the aisle of St. George's Cathedral. Her eyes, once bright with naivety, were now steeled with a cynical resilience. She wore a nightgown of white silk, high-necked and long-sleeved, armor for a battle that never happened. A heavy tread sounded in the corridor. Isobel froze. It was him. The footsteps approached her door, heavy and authoritative. For the first year of their marriage, her heart would race every time he walked past. She would hold her breath, praying the handle would turn, that he would storm in and demand her, or yell at her, or acknowledge her existence in any way. But he never did. But he never did. The footsteps paused. The shadow of his boots blocked the sliver of light beneath her door. Isobel gripped the edge of the vanity, her knuckles turning white. Just walk away, she thought, a mix of desire and resentment churning in her stomach. Do what you always do. Leave me to wither. After a pause that felt like an eternity, the shadow moved on. The door to the master's suite further down the hall opened and closed with a definitive click. The lock slid home. Isobel let out a shaky breath, her shoulders sagging. The lock was the insult that cut deepest. He didn't just sleep apart from her. He locked his door as if he feared she might creep in like a thief in the night to steal the affection he refused to give. 7 years. No heirs. No intimacy. Not even a touch of the hand at the dinner table. She stood up, the silk rustling around her legs, and walked to the window. Outside, the English countryside was lashed by autumn rain. Why, she whispered to the glass, What did I do? It was the question that had tormented her since their wedding night. That night, Alistair had come to her chambers, still in his formal wear. He had looked at her, not with the adoration he had shown during their courtship, but with a cold, terrifying fury. He had tossed a pillow onto the chaise lounge, told her to sleep, and warned her never to ask him for anything beyond the material comforts of his station. He had turned a blooming romance into a funeral in the span of an hour. Isobel turned from the window. She was done asking why. Tomorrow was the grand hunt ball. The entire peerage would be there. Her cousin-in-law, Sebastian, had been making snide comments about the lack of an heir, circling the estate like a vulture waiting for a carcass. She walked to her wardrobe and pulled out a trunk. It was small, battered leather. She began to pack. Not a lot, just her jewels, the few pounds she had squirreled away from the household allowance, and a locket with her mother's portrait. She wasn't going to stay for year 8. She would attend the ball, play the part of the perfect Duchess one last time to avoid immediate scandal, and then, under the cover of the festivities, she would vanish. Let Alistair explain to the Queen where his wife had gone. She crawled into the cold, massive bed, shivering despite the heavy velvet blankets. She didn't know that down the hall, Alistair was pouring his 3rd glass of brandy, staring at a crumpled, yellowing piece of paper he had kept in his desk drawer for 7 years, a paper that justified his cruelty, even as it broke his heart. The following evening, the ballroom of Blackwood Manor was a kaleidoscope of swirling silks, sparkling diamonds, and the dizzying scent of expensive perfume. An orchestra played a waltz from Vienna, but the music felt like a dirge to Alistair. He stood by the marble fireplace, a glass of champagne untouched in his gloved hand. He was a striking figure, tall, with broad shoulders that strained against his tailcoat, and hair as black as a raven's wing. His jaw was sharp, his eyes a piercing, icy blue that usually kept people at a distance. "You look like a man facing a firing squad, not a host," a smooth voice purred. Alistair didn't turn. He knew that voice. Sebastian. His cousin, his heir presumptive, and the only man Alistair tolerated in small doses. "The noise gives me a headache, Sebastian. That is all." Sebastian took a sip of his drink, his eyes scanning the room. "A headache, or is it the sight of your lovely wife enchanting half the House of Lords?" Alistair's grip on his glass tightened. He looked across the floor. Isobel was dancing. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet that left her shoulders bare, exposing creamy skin that Alistair had dreamed of touching every night for 7 years and denied himself every morning. She was laughing at something her partner, Lord Henry Wotton, had said. It was a genuine laugh, a sound Alistair hadn't heard directed at him since before the wedding. "She seems spirited tonight," Sebastian noted, a malicious glint in his eye. "Perhaps she's finally tired of the nunnery you keep her in." "Watch your tongue," Alistair snapped, his voice a low growl. "I'm just saying, cousin." 7 years. Nature has its demands. If you won't tend to your garden, someone else will eventually hop the fence. Alistair felt a surge of red-hot rage, but he forced it down. He had no right to be jealous. He had made his choice. He thought back to that night. The wedding night. He had been so drunk on love, ready to sweep Isobel into his arms. He had gone to his study to fetch a gift for her, a pearl necklace. There, sitting on his desk, was a letter. It was in Isobel's handwriting. He knew her script perfectly. He had saved every note she ever sent him during their courtship. The letter was addressed to "My dearest Thomas." Alistair closed his eyes, the words burning in his memory even now. "The fool has married me. The title is mine. I will bear his touch only as long as I must to secure the fortune, and then we shall use his gold to build our life. He is a dull, cold instrument, but he served his purpose. My heart remains yours." Thomas was a stable hand on her father's estate. A nobody. Alistair had never confronted her. The humiliation was too great. To know that the shy smiles and blushing glances were all a performance. It had shattered him. He couldn't annul the marriage without exposing the letter and making himself the laughingstock of England. So he punished her. He gave her the title she wanted, the money she craved, but he denied her the one thing she supposedly didn't want, himself. He opened his eyes. Isobel was spinning, her hand resting on Lord Henry's shoulder. He couldn't take it. Alistair set his glass down on the mantelpiece with a sharp clack and strode onto the dance floor. The crowd parted for the Duke. He moved with the predatory grace of a panther. He reached the couple just as the music swelled. He didn't acknowledge Lord Henry. He simply extended a hand to Isobel. "My wife, I believe," Alistair said, his voice cutting through the ambient chatter. Isobel's smile vanished. Her face went pale, her eyes widening in genuine shock. Alistair never danced. Especially not with her. "Alistair," she whispered. "Dance with me." It wasn't a request. Lord Henry, sensing the danger radiating off the Duke, bowed quickly and retreated. Alistair pulled Isobel into his frame. His hand settled on her waist, firm, possessive, hot. Isobel gasped. The contact was electric. It was the first time he had touched her voluntarily in 7 years. They began to move. The waltz was intimate, requiring them to be close. Alistair could smell her scent, lavender and rain. It made his head spin. "To what do I owe the honors?" Isobel asked, her voice trembling slightly. She kept her chin high, refusing to show fear. "You seem to be enjoying yourself too much," Alistair muttered, looking over her head rather than into her eyes. "It is unbecoming." Unbecoming to smile. Isobel scoffed, a spark of anger returning. "I am a living woman, Alistair, not one of your statues." I am allowed to find joy where I can, since I find none in my own home. Joy. Alistair looked down at her then, his blue eyes blazing. Is that what you call flirting with Wotton? Planning your next conquest? My next? Isobel frowned. I haven't had a first conquest husband. Or have you forgotten that I am the only married virgin in London? Don't play the martyr, Isobel. It doesn't suit you. I know who you are. I know what you are. Isobel stopped moving. They were in the center of the floor, but she didn't care. She pulled away from him, her chest heaving. You know nothing about me. She hissed, low enough that only he could hear. You have judged me for a crime I do not know the name of. But I am done serving the sentence. She turned and ran. Not just off the dance floor. She ran out of the ballroom, through the grand foyer, and out into the stormy night. Alistair stood frozen for a moment, the warmth of her waist still burning his hand. A sudden, terrible feeling clawed at his gut. It wasn't anger. It was panic. Let her go, Sebastian appeared at his elbow, offering a fresh glass of wine. She's just being dramatic. She'll be back by morning. Alistair looked at his cousin. For the first time, he noticed something in Sebastian's expression. A smugness, a satisfaction that didn't fit the moment. He is a dull, cold instrument. The words from the letter echoed. But Isobel had just looked him in the eye with a confusion that felt incredibly real. A crime I do not know the name of. If she was a master manipulator, why flee? Why not stay and charm Wotton? Alistair slammed the wine glass into Sebastian's chest, splashing the red liquid over his cousin's pristine white waistcoat. You better hope she comes back, Sebastian, Alistair snarled. He ran after her. The rain was torrential, turning the manicured gardens of Blackwood into a swamp. Alistair didn't care. He ruined his boots, his coat soaking through in seconds. Isobel, he roared, his voice battling the thunder. He found her near the stables. She was struggling to saddle a mare, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't tighten the girth. She was still in her ball gown, the velvet mud-stained and heavy with water. Are you mad? Alistair grabbed her shoulders, spinning her around. It's a tempest out here. Let me go, Isobel screamed, fighting him with a strength he didn't know she possessed. She struck his chest with her fists. I am leaving. I am leaving you, Alistair. I can't do it anymore. I won't die in that house. You aren't going anywhere. He pinned her against the stable wall, his body shielding her from the wind. Stop fighting me. Why? So you can lock me up again. Rain streamed down her face, mixing with tears. You hate me. You've always hated me. Just let me leave and you can be happy. I don't hate you. Alistair yelled back, the truth tearing out of his throat before he could stop it. Isobel went still, panting. Are you? You don't. No. Alistair gripped her arms, his face inches from hers. I have driven myself mad trying to hate you. But I can't. Even knowing what you did, I can't. What I did. Isobel cried out, hysterical laughter bubbling up. What did I do? Did I breathe too loud? Did I wear the wrong color? Tell me, Alistair. Tell me the sin so I can at least understand my punishment. Lightning flashed, illuminating the raw agony in her eyes. It was the look of a woman wrongly convicted. Alistair reached into the inner pocket of his soaked coat. He didn't have the letter, but he had the words. Thomas, he said. Isobel stared at him. Who? Thomas. The stable boy. Your lover. Isobel looked at him as if he was speaking a foreign language. We didn't have a stable boy named Thomas. We had old Pete, who was 80. Alistair froze. The letter. On our wedding night. You wrote to him. You said you married me for my fortune, that I was a dull instrument. Isobel's jaw dropped. I never wrote such a thing. I loved you, Alistair. I worshipped you. I wrote in my diary that I was the luckiest woman in England. I saw it. It was your handwriting. Alistair insisted, though the ice in his heart was beginning to crack. My handwriting. Isobel's eyes narrowed. Or a forgery. Who gave you this letter? I found it on my desk. Who had access to your desk? Alistair's mind raced. The wedding day chaos. The people coming and going. Who had been in the study? Sebastian. Sebastian had been in there, checking the brandy supply. Sebastian, who was deeply in debt. Sebastian, who became the heir if Alistair had no children. The realization hit Alistair with the force of a physical blow. He staggered back, releasing Isobel. Oh God, he whispered. 7 years. Isobel saw the horror on his face. She realized, with a sickening lurch, that he was telling the truth. He hadn't rejected her out of cruelty. He had rejected her because he thought she was the monster. You believed a piece of paper over me, she asked, her voice breaking. You never asked. You just condemned me. I was afraid, Alistair admitted, his voice ragged. I was afraid that if I asked, you would confirm it. And I knew that if you confirmed it, I would have to send you away. And I couldn't bear to send you away. So I kept you. Like a prisoner. They stood in the rain, 2 statues in the mud. The wall of silence was gone, leaving only the wreckage of wasted time. I am cold, Alistair, Isobel whispered, hugging herself. Alistair looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in 7 years. He saw the woman he had hurt. The woman who had stayed. He stepped forward and scooped her up into his arms. She was light, too light. "Put me down," she protested weakly. "No," he said, holding her tight against his chest. "I am taking you inside, not to your room. To ours." "I haven't forgiven you," she said, shivering. "I know," Alistair buried his face in her wet hair. "I will spend the rest of my life earning it. But tonight, you need to be warm." He carried her out of the storm and back toward the manor. But the storm outside was nothing compared to the one brewing inside the house. Sebastian was watching from the window, and he knew his time was running out. The master suite of Blackwood Manor was a place Isobel had never entered. In 7 years, it had been a fortress of solitude, a mystery barred to her by oak and iron. Now she was inside. Alistair kicked the heavy door shut, sealing them in. The room was vast, dominated by a 4-poster bed draped in heavy hunter green velvet and a massive stone fireplace where embers still glowed. He carried her directly to the hearth. He set her down on the thick rug, but his hands didn't leave her. He immediately turned, grabbing logs from the basket and throwing them onto the embers, stoking the fire until it roared with aggressive life. "You're shivering," he murmured, his voice rough. Isobel sat on the rug, the water from her gown pooling around her. She felt numb, not just from the cold, but from the revelation. A forgery. 7 years of loneliness because of a piece of paper. "Alistair," she said, her voice small. "I want to see it." "Not now, Isobel. You need dry clothes." "I need to see it," she insisted, her teeth chattering. "I need to see the thing that stole my life." Alistair stopped. He looked at her, his face etched with a pain so raw it frightened her. He walked to a heavy mahogany secretary desk in the corner. He unlocked a drawer with a key he kept on a chain around his neck, close to his heart, ironically, and pulled out a folded, yellowing parchment. He handed it to her as if it were a loaded gun. Isobel took it. Her wet fingers trembled. She unfolded the paper. The handwriting was uncannily similar to hers. The loops of the Y, the cross of the T. But the words. "My dearest Thomas, the fool has married me. He is a dull, cold instrument." She read the words that had turned her husband into her jailer. Tears, hot and fast, spilled onto the paper, blurring the ink. "It's a lie," she sobbed, crumpling the paper against her chest. "I never knew a Thomas. I never called you a fool. I loved you so much it hurt to breathe." Alistair dropped to his knees before her. The proud, arrogant Duke who had terrified London society was gone. In his place was a man broken by his own gullibility. "I know," he rasped. "I know that now. And I hate myself for it. I hated myself for 7 years, because I couldn't stop wanting you, even when I thought you despised me. I locked my door because if I didn't, I would have come to you. I would have begged for scraps of affection from a woman I thought was a monster." He reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek. "May I?" Isobel looked at him. She saw the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the grey hairs at his temples that hadn't been there on their wedding day. They were both victims of this crime. "Oh, yes," she whispered. His hand cupped her face. His thumb brushed away a tear. Then he moved with frantic urgency. He turned her around and began to undo the buttons of her sodden gown. His fingers were clumsy with cold and desperation. When the heavy velvet fell away, leaving her in her chemise, he didn't pull back. He pulled her against him, his wet clothes soaking hers, the heat of his body searing through the layers. "Isobel," he buried his face in her neck, inhaling the scent of her skin. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. I have wasted our youth." "We are not dead yet, Alistair," she said, her hands finding purchase in his dark, wet hair. He pulled back to look at her, his blue eyes burning with a feverish intensity. "Then let me claim you. Not as the Duke taking his rights, but as a man asking for mercy. For 7 years, I never touched you. Tonight, I beg you. Let me be your husband." It was the surrender she had waited a lifetime for. The wall of ice shattered completely. "Claim me, Alistair," she breathed. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision of 7 years of starvation. He kissed her until she was breathless, his hands roaming over her, learning the curves he had denied himself. He lifted her again, carrying her to the massive bed. The storm outside raged, rattling the window panes, but inside, the silence was finally broken. There were no more secrets. There was only the sound of skin against skin, of whispered names, and the desperate, frantic joining of two souls who had been starving in sight of the feast. That night, the Duke of Blackwood did not sleep. He spent the hours worshipping his wife's body, memorizing every inch of her, trying to make up for 2,555 nights of solitude in the span of a single darkness. And when Isobel finally fell asleep, exhausted and wrapped in his arms, Alistair lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His hand stroked her hair gently, but his eyes were hard as flint. He had his wife back. But the man who had tried to take her from him, the man who had forged that letter, was still in the house. And Alistair was going to destroy him. The morning sun hit the Blackwood estate with a deceptive brilliance. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean, but the mud remained. Downstairs, the household staff was in a tizzy. The maid who had gone to wake the Duchess found her bed empty and unslept in. A ripple of scandalous panic moved through the servants' hall. Had she run away? Had she been kidnapped? Then the valet, a stoic man named Bates, came down from the master suite with a rare, small smile on his face. "The Duchess," Bates announced while polishing a silver tray, is breakfasting with his grace. In his chambers. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. Then the cook dropped a ladle. In his chambers. It was unprecedented. Upstairs, the atmosphere was far from the domestic bliss the servants imagined. Isobel sat at the small round table near the window, wearing one of Alistair's silk dressing gowns, the sleeves rolled up to accommodate her slender arms. She watched Alistair as he dressed. He was buttoning a crisp white shirt, his face grim. "Sebastian," Isobel said, the name tasting like ash. "Are you certain?" He was the only one in the study. Alistair said, his voice clipped. "I remember now. I was called away to greet the bishop. Sebastian said he would wait there and pour himself a drink. He had 10 minutes alone with my desk. But the handwriting..." Isobel frowned, buttering a piece of toast with a shaking hand. "It was perfect, Alistair. Sebastian has a heavy hand. He writes like a doctor. How could he mimic my script so perfectly? Changed my mind to save my reputation. It is your word against his, and the letter exists. The letter is a forgery." Alistair slammed his hand on the dresser. "We know that. But society loves a scandal. If we expose this and cannot prove it was him, I will be branded an adulteress who tricked her way back into your bed, and you will be the fool who let her." Isobel stood up, walking over to him. She fixed his cravat, her touch soothing his anger. "We need proof, Alistair. Irrefutable proof." Alistair looked down at her, his eyes softening. "You have become a strategist, my love. I had 7 years to think," she replied dryly. "We must play a part. We must pretend that nothing is amiss. That we have simply reconciled. We must make him nervous. A nervous man makes mistakes." The performance began at noon. Alistair and Isobel descended the grand staircase together. Alistair's hand rested possessively on the small of her back. They walked into the drawing room where Sebastian was lounging, reading the Times and nursing a sherry. When they entered, Sebastian looked up. For a split second, his mask slipped. His eyes widened, his jaw tightening. He had expected to hear that Isobel had fled in the night, or that Alistair was in a rage. Instead, he saw a couple glowing with the sickening aura of newfound intimacy. Isobel was wearing a dress of pale rose, a color she hadn't worn since her debutante days. She looked radiant. "Good morning, cousin," Alistair said smoothly, guiding Isobel to the sofa and sitting close beside her. Sebastian recovered quickly, folding his newspaper. "Alistair. Isobel. You look refreshed. I trust the storm didn't keep you up." "On the contrary," Alistair smirked, locking eyes with Sebastian. "The storm was quite invigorating. It cleared the air. Isobel and I have had a long talk. A very long, very detailed talk." Sebastian's knuckles turned white around his glass. "Oh. About what? About the past," Isobel chimed in, her voice sweet and deadly. "And about the future. Alistair and I have decided it is time to focus on the estate. And the succession. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Succession. Sebastian's inheritance relied on Alistair dying childless. That is wonderful news, Sebastian choked out. Truly, we thought so, Alistair said. In fact, I'm planning a thorough audit of the estate. Every ledger, every correspondence, every unauthorized visitor for the last decade. I feel I've been too lax with my affairs. Sebastian stood up abruptly. I must remember I have an appointment in the village. If you'll excuse me, he bowed stiffly and practically fled the room. Alistair waited until the door clicked shut. Then his smile vanished. He's running. Where is he going? Isobel asked. To cover his tracks, Alistair stood up. Stay here. Lock the door. Do not let anyone in, not even the maids. Where are you? Going. To follow the rat to his hole. Alistair did not take a horse. He took the path through the woods on foot, tracking Sebastian's carriage. He knew where Sebastian went when he was in trouble. There was an old hunting lodge on the edge of the estate, a place that had fallen into disrepair. Sebastian had claimed it as his bachelor pad years ago. Alistair moved silently through the underbrush. He reached the edge of the clearing just as Sebastian's carriage rattled to a halt. Sebastian jumped out. He didn't go into the lodge. Instead, he went to the small carriage house behind it. A moment later, another figure emerged from the shadows to meet him. Alistair squinted. It was a woman. She was wearing a heavy cloak, but as she turned, Alistair recognized the profile. It was Mrs. Holloway. His blood ran cold. Mrs. Holloway had been Isobel's governess. She had come with Isobel from her father's house to Blackwood Manor. She was the one woman Isobel trusted implicitly, the woman who had dried Isobel's tears for 7 years. Alistair crept closer, hiding behind a stack of firewood. You said it would work. Sebastian was hissing, pacing back and forth. You said the letter would drive him away forever. Now they are playing house. He's talking about an audit, Holloway. An audit. Keep your voice down, you fool, Mrs. Holloway snapped. Her voice, usually so maternal and soft, was sharp and brittle. If he does an audit, he'll find the embezzlement. He'll find more than that. He'll find the practice sheets. Sebastian grabbed her by the shoulders. You still have them, don't you? The pages where you practiced her handwriting. I kept them as insurance. Holloway sneered, pushing him off. To ensure you kept paying me my share of the household accounts. Burn them. Sebastian panicked. Burn them now. If he finds out you forged that letter, we will both hang for fraud. I can't just burn them here. She hissed. They are in my trunk at the manor. In the attic. Then get them. Sebastian shouted. Get them and destroy them before he finds them. Tonight. When they are asleep. And if they don't sleep? Holloway asked darkly. They seem very occupied with one another. Sebastian's face twisted into a mask of pure malice. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small glass vial filled with a clear liquid. "Then ensure they sleep," Sebastian whispered. "Put this in the evening wine. It won't kill them, that would look too suspicious. But it will make them sleep heavy and deep. Deep enough that they won't wake up if, say, a candle were to accidentally tip over and catch the drapes on fire." Alistair felt a surge of violent rage, so potent he almost charged them then and there. But he held back. He needed the evidence. He needed the practice sheets in the trunk. If he attacked now, they might destroy the proof. He watched as Sebastian pressed the vial into the governess's hand. "Tonight," Sebastian said, "burn the evidence. And if the manor burns with it, well, it's a tragedy, isn't it?" Alistair waited until they parted ways. Then he turned and ran back toward the manor. He had to get to Isobel before tea time. The enemy wasn't just at the gate, she was in the nursery and she was preparing to strike. Alistair burst into Isobel's chambers, his chest heaving. He found her arranging flowers by the window, the picture of domestic tranquility. "Isobel," he said, locking the door behind him. "We have a problem. A traitor." Isobel turned, a smile ready, but it died when she saw the look on his face. "Sebastian and Mrs. Holloway." Isobel dropped the vase. It shattered, water and roses spilling across the floor. "No, that's impossible. She raised me. She was more of a mother to me than my own." "I saw them," Alistair said, stepping over the broken glass to take her hands. "In the woods. She forged the letter, Isobel. She practiced your handwriting for weeks. She did it for money, and she's been helping Sebastian embezzle from the estate ever since." Isobel swayed, the betrayal cutting deeper than the 7 years of coldness. "Why? I loved her." She wiped a tear from her cheek, her expression transforming from grief to a cold, diamond-hard fury. "She stole 7 years of my life. She stole my husband. And now she wants to burn me in my bed." "We have to catch them in the act," Alistair said. "The evidence, the practice sheets, are in her trunk in the attic. She plans to burn them tonight." "Then let us give them a performance," Isobel said, her voice steady. Dinner that night was a masterpiece of tension. The dining room was lit by candlelight, casting long, dancing shadows against the tapestries. Sebastian had returned, looking flushed and jittery. Mrs. Holloway stood by the sideboard, decanting a vintage red wine. "A special vintage," Sebastian said, his voice too loud. "To celebrate your reconciliation." "How kind of you, cousin," Isobel said. She looked at Mrs. Holloway. "Will you pour Martha?" Using the governess's first name was a calculated blow. Mrs. Holloway's hand trembled slightly as she filled the crystal goblets. She placed one before Alistair and one before Isobel. To the future, Sebastian raised his glass. Alistair lifted his goblet. He looked at the deep, red liquid. He knew it was laced with a sedative strong enough to knock a horse unconscious. To the truth, Alistair corrected. He brought the glass to his lips. Isobel did the same. Mrs. Holloway watched with the intensity of a hawk. Holloway watched with the intensity of a hawk. Sebastian was practically sweating. Alistair and Isobel tilted their heads back. But they did not drink. In the dim light, and with the practiced sleight of hand Alistair had learned during his wild youth in gaming hells, he allowed the liquid to spill down his chin and into his napkin, feigning a deep swallow. Isobel, holding her napkin to her lips as if to dab them, spat the liquid into the linen. "Excellent," Alistair murmured. He set the glass down. "Though a bit heavy." "It has a full body," Sebastian said quickly. 10 minutes later, the performance escalated. Alistair rubbed his temples. "Isobel, do you feel?" "Quite right." "I feel dizzy," Isobel whispered, swaying in her chair. "Quite right, I feel dizzy," Isobel whispered, swaying in her chair. "So tired." She slumped forward, her head hitting the table with a soft thud. "Isobel." Alistair stood up, staggering. He knocked over his chair. "What have you done?" He collapsed onto the floor, sprawling out on the Persian rug. Silence descended on the room. "Are they out?" Sebastian whispered. Mrs. Holloway walked over to Alistair. She nudged him with the toe of her boot. He didn't move. She lifted his eyelid. He rolled his eyes back into his head, a trick he'd mastered as a boy to scare his nursemaids. "They are out," Holloway said. "Deeper." "They won't wake up until noon tomorrow, if they wake up at all." "Let's get it done," Sebastian said, grabbing a candelabra. "The attic first. The evidence. Then the curtains in here." They left the room. The moment the door clicked shut, Alistair's eyes snapped open. He scrambled up, helping Isobel to her feet. "Are you all right?" he whispered. "I am furious," she replied, kicking off her heels so she could move silently. "Let's go." The stairway to the attic was narrow, a servant's passage that smelled of dry rot and centuries of settled dust. Alistair moved first, his boots making no sound on the worn wood. He held a heavy brass poker he had snatched from the fireplace in the master bedroom. Behind him, Isobel followed, her breathing shallow but steady. She had discarded her silk slippers to move silently, her stockinged feet gripping the rough boards. They reached the landing. The door to the attic was ajar, spilling a flickering, sickly yellow light into the dark hallway. Shadows danced on the peeling wallpaper, grotesque elongated shapes that mimicked the treachery taking place inside. Alistair held up a hand, signaling Isobel to stop. He leaned forward, peering through the crack in the door. The attic was a cavernous graveyard of the Blackwood history. Mounds of furniture covered in white sheets looked like sleeping ghosts. Stacks of leather-bound trunks formed a maze of forgotten memories. In the center of the clearing, illuminated by a three-branch candelabra resting precariously on an upturned crate, were the conspirators. Sebastian was pacing, his shadow stretching long against the sloped ceiling. He looked manic, his hair disheveled, his cravat undone. He was no longer the smug aristocrat, he was a cornered rat. "Burn them all, Martha," Sebastian hissed, his voice echoing in the rafters. "Don't just read them. The fire needs fuel." Mrs. Halloway, the woman who had braided Isobel's hair, who had held her hand when she wept over Alistair's coldness, was kneeling on the floor. She had forced open an old trunk. Her hands, usually so steady and gentle, were clawing through papers with a frantic, greedy energy. "Patience, you fool!" Halloway snapped, her voice unrecognizable in its harshness. "We must ensure we burn the right ones. If we burn the household ledgers by mistake, you'll inherit a financial ruin." "I don't care about the ledgers." Sebastian kicked a pile of books. "I care about the noose. If Alistair wakes up..." "He won't," Halloway muttered, pulling a sheaf of yellowed parchment from the bottom of the trunk. She held it up to the candlelight. "Here, the practice sheets. My dearest Thomas." God, it took me 3 weeks to master that loop in the L. Isobel let out a soft, strangled gasp. Hearing the confession so plainly, seeing the pride in the older woman's face, felt like a physical blow. Alistair reached back, squeezing Isobel's hand tight, anchoring her. "Burn it," Sebastian commanded. "Now." Halloway lowered the papers toward the flame. The edge of the parchment began to curl and brown. Alistair kicked the door open. It slammed against the wall with a thunderous bang. "I wouldn't do that," Alistair roared, his voice filling the room with the authority of the Duke of Blackwood. Sebastian spun around so fast he nearly tripped over his own feet. His face went chalk white. "Alistair, you drank the wine. We have better taste than to drink your poison, cousin," Alistair snarled, stepping into the light, the brass poker gripped white-knuckled in his hand. Isobel stepped out from behind him. She ignored Sebastian entirely. Her eyes were locked on the governess. "Martha," Isobel whispered, the name carrying a lifetime of betrayal. Mrs. Halloway froze. For a second, the mask of the kindly servant slipped back into place, a reflex of fear. But as she looked at the cold fury in Isobel's eyes, she dropped the act. She stood up, clutching the incriminating papers to her chest. "You should be asleep, child," Halloway said, her voice devoid of warmth. "Why?" Isobel stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I loved you. I treated you like family. I gave you a home, when my father wanted to dismiss you? Why did you destroy my life? Family, Holloway laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. I was a servant, Isobel. I wiped your nose, I taught you your letters, I listened to your endless prattle about love and dresses. And for what? £20 a year and a room in the attic. You married a duke. You walked into a fortune greater than God's, and what did I get? A silk scarf for Christmas. It was about money. Isobel asked, tears finally spilling over. Just money. It is always about money when you don't have any. Holloway spat. Sebastian offered me £10,000. 10,000. Enough to retire. Enough to be a person, not just a shadow in your hallway. All I had to do was write a letter. And it was so easy. You were so naive, and he was so proud. I knew exactly which buttons to press. You are a monster, Alistair said, his voice low and dangerous. And you, Sebastian, you are a coward. I am the rightful heir. Sebastian screamed, his sanity fraying at the edges. You don't deserve this title, Alistair. You treat it like a burden. I would have been a king among peers. And now. Sebastian's hand darted into his coat pocket. Don't be stupid, Sebastian, Alistair warned, taking a step forward. Give it up. We have the servants waiting downstairs. The constable is on his way. You're lying, Sebastian panted, sweat dripping down his forehead. You came up here alone. To catch us. That was your mistake. He pulled the pistol. It was a small, pearl-handled derringer, a gentleman's weapon intended for card tables, but deadly at close range. No, Isobel screamed. Burn the papers, Martha, Sebastian yelled, leveling the gun at Alistair's chest. Burn them or I shoot. Holloway hesitated, then threw the sheaf of papers onto the floor and kicked the candelabra over. The candles tumbled into the pile of dry parchment and old linen sheets. Worship. The fire caught instantly, leaping up with terrifying speed, hungry for the oxygen in the dry, dusty room. The evidence, Sebastian shouted triumphantly. Alistair didn't look at the fire. He looked at the gun. He saw Sebastian's finger tighten on the trigger. Alistair didn't think, he reacted. He lunged not at Sebastian, but across the line of fire to shield Isobel. Crack! The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Alistair grunted, a sharp, hot impact slamming into his left shoulder. The force spun him around, but he didn't fall. The adrenaline of 7 years of repressed rage flooded his veins, masking the pain. Alistair, Isobel cried out, horror etched on her face. Get the papers, Alistair roared at her. I have him, Alistair charged through the smoke. Sebastian tried to recock the pistol, his hands shaking violently, but he was too slow. Alistair slammed into him, driving his shoulder into Sebastian's chest. They crashed backward into a stack of old portraits. Glass shattered, canvas ripped, and the two men went down in a heap of dust and violence. Sebastian fought dirty, clawing at Alistair's face, gouging at his eyes. But Alistair was a man possessed. He ignored the blood soaking his shirt. He grabbed Sebastian by the lapels and slammed his head against the floorboards. Once, twice, for 7 years. Alistair grunted with each blow. You took 7 years. Sebastian went limp, his eyes rolling back. Across the room, the fire was spreading. The flames had licked up the side of a velvet curtain and were climbing toward the wooden beams of the roof. Isobel scrambled on her hands and knees toward the burning pile. The heat was intense, stinging her eyebrows. Mrs. Holloway was standing there, watching the fire with a dazed expression, as if mesmerizing by her own destruction. "Help me!" Isobel screamed at her. "The whole house will burn." Holloway blinked, looking at the flames, then at the door. Self-preservation kicked in. She turned to run. "No, you don't." Isobel lunged. She grabbed the hem of Holloway's skirt. The older woman kicked out, striking Isobel in the ribs, but Isobel refused to let go. She yanked hard, and Holloway lost her balance, crashing to the floor. Isobel didn't stay to fight her. She turned back to the fire. The practice sheets, the proof of her innocence, were in the center of the flames. She grabbed a heavy wool blanket from an open trunk. Ignoring the searing heat, she threw the blanket over the fire and stomped on it. She stomped with all the fury of a woman scorned, crushing the flames, suffocating the heat, stamping out the lie that had ruled her marriage. Smoke billowed up, thick and gray, choking her. She coughed, eyes watering, but she kept stomping until the orange glow vanished, leaving only charred black scraps. Silence fell over the attic, broken only by the heavy panting of the 4 people inside. Alistair rolled off Sebastian and sat up, clutching his shoulder. Blood was seeping through his fingers, staining his white shirt a brilliant crimson. "Alistair!" Isobel scrambled over to him, her face smudged with soot and tears. She ripped the hem of her petticoat, her hands shaking as she pressed the cloth against his wound. "You're shot. Oh God, you're shot." "I'm fine," Alistair winced, his face pale but his eyes bright. He looked over at the pile of charred papers. "Did you save them?" Isobel looked at the debris. The edges were burnt, but the center of the stack, where Holloway had practiced the signature over and over, was intact. "I saved them," she whispered. Mrs. Holloway was huddled in the corner, sobbing quietly, her spirit broken by the failure of her gamble. Sebastian lay unconscious amidst the ruins of the family portraits. Alistair reached up with his good hand and cupped Isobel's cheek, thumbing away a smudge of ash. "Then it's over," he rasped. "The war is over, Isobel." She leaned into his touch, resting her forehead against his. "Let's go home, Alistair. Let's go downstairs." 1 year later. The scandal of the Blackwood plot had been the delight of the London tabloids for months. The trial was swift. Sebastian's attempt to claim insanity was dismissed when the forged papers were presented to the magistrate. He and Mrs. Halloway were currently on a transport ship bound for the penal colonies in Australia, never to return to England's shores. Had finally been exorcised. The heavy velvet drapes that had once blocked out the sun were pulled back, flooding the rooms with golden afternoon light. The silence that had suffocated the hallways was gone, replaced by the sounds of life. In the nursery, painted a soft, cheerful yellow, Isobel sat in a rocking chair. In her arms lay a bundle wrapped in white lace. Alexander, the future Duke of Blackwood, currently 3 months old and sleeping soundly. The door opened quietly. Alistair walked in. He moved with an ease that had been absent for years, though he still favored his left shoulder when the weather turned damp, a permanent reminder of the night he finally fought for his wife. He didn't speak immediately. He just watched them. For 7 years, he had dreaded entering this house. Now it was the only place he wanted to be. "He's finally asleep," Isobel whispered, smiling without looking up. "Don't you dare wake him." Alistair chuckled softly, walking over to kneel beside the chair. "I wouldn't dream of it. I value my life too much to cross you, Duchess." He reached out, running a finger gently over the baby's soft cheek, then took Isobel's hand. He turned it over, kissing the palm, then the wrist, his lips lingering on her pulse. "I received a letter from the Queen today," Alistair said softly. "She wishes to congratulate us on the birth. She hinted that we have been absent from court for too long." "Let her wait," Isobel said, leaning her head back against the chair. "We have 7 years of lost time to make up for. I have no intention of sharing you with the peerage just yet." Alistair looked up at her, his blue eyes filled with a devotion that banished the memory of the cold, angry man he used to be. "I am yours, Isobel," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. "Every hour of every day, until the stars burn out." And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a saga of romance, betrayal, and redemption. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.